Podcasting from a secret location deep inside the political colossus. This is Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich. Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Canada? Yes, that's correct.
Oh my God, they've got a madman on their hands.
We will have no truce nor parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls.
This is Radio Free GOP with your host, Mike Murphy.
You've got mail, and it's not good. Hillary's rough week. Here we are, 6 days out. We're going to talk about that. We're going to take a final look at the down-ballot races, and we're going to talk to the Ayatollah of Pollsters, the one and only Neil Newhouse, about what may happen less than 1 week from today. It's all here on the voice of Republican resistance, Radio Free GOP.
He used to have a big career, but now he's had enough. Podcasting's like therapy. His shrink says it's great stuff. Radio Free GOP.
Well, we made it. We have crawled our way across the broken glass of this election, and here we are just 6 days out. You know, the law says we have to have one of these people as president, so we're going to have one. And now the voting has begun. You know, we have so much early voting now. Election day is really a week long. We're probably 25 plus million votes into the election already have been cast. So if you think of election day as being a week long, it's already about 9:30 in the morning. So where's it going? What's going to happen? Well, clearly, the big news is the email news. FBI Director Jim Comey announced on Friday that, his agents working on the investigation of Democratic super perv Anthony Weiner, who happened to be until recently married to top Hillary Clinton aide, most trusted aide, most powerful aide, and in many circles, most feared aide. She's the one you see in the wire photographs standing around on the tarmac with designer sunglasses looking guilty. Her email accounts apparently have some interesting things to the FBI. Now, we don't know if they just have duplicates of the emails the FBI has already looked at, or there might be new emails that would give new fuel to the fire that Hillary Clinton had broken the law on how she handled sensitive, top-secret material on that private server, where Huma Abedin, that chief aide, also had an account. Now, there's a lot of controversy over what the FBI director has done here. Some people say he's putting a thumb on the scale just 11 days before the election with a charge that could affect the outcome. That's mostly what Democrats and a few Republicans say, many of whom were praising him just 8 weeks ago when he said that there was no crime in what Hillary did on her emails that was worth prosecuting. So he was a hero, a towering figure of justice back then. Now, of course, he's seen as a narrow political hack by the same people who were praising him. On the other hand, the Republicans, who said he was a narrow political hack when he said Hillary shouldn't be prosecuted, now say he's the next Elliot Ness, and thank God he brought this horrible news to our attention. So what did Comey do, right or wrong? Well, here's my take on it. First of all, he was in a tough position. He either doesn't announce it, and it would almost certainly leak, and then it looks like some kind of cover-up to protect Hillary Clinton. Or he announces it as he did and is open, as he is, to charges that he's put a big thumb on the election, meddling 11 days beforehand, affecting the outcome perhaps, and doing something that non-political FBI directors are never supposed to do. He's also feuding with his own Justice Department, though I would argue the Justice Department has shown itself to be way too political in this Hillary Clinton investigation from the beginning. So if I was working for Comey, what would I have told him to do? Pretty simple. Don't put the letter out. Because if it leaks, then that's somebody else's mistake, and you can respond to it with language that should narrow the speculation. In other words, yes, there are new emails. No, we do not know if the new emails are any different than the emails we already have. We have a bunch of hawk-eyed agents going through them. It'll take some time. Only if we find new emails that we've never seen before could it even affect the investigation. In other words, tamp down the crazy speculation with the response to any leak. Or if Director Comey really insisted he felt that he had to tell the Congress about this and felt duty-bound, I take him at his word, the letter he put out could have been a lot more restrictive. This letter was too vague, too opaque, too open-ended, and all it served to do was throw kerosene on the Washington, D.C. media speculation machine, which is pretty hyperventilating to begin with. So now he's got the media storm that probably he wished he didn't have. The last question is, will he say anything else? The Hillary campaign has dug in on the idea that he's gone rogue and this is irresponsible. That's a dangerous strategy. Now, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to whip up their people to get a fortress mentality, turn out, vote who they already have, they are ahead, and win the election. The problem is we know this Comey character has a hair trigger when it comes to making big public statements. And they should be careful about goading him into another one because he could rehash how we got here, which was Hillary's bad decision-making. She is the one who had the knuckleheaded decision to have her own private email server and not observe very stringent security rules with it. She's the one who wouldn't fess up and tell the truth after she got caught. So this problem, despite whatever we might say about Director Comey's ham-handed handling of it, is one of her creation. And that chicken could come home to roost politically. Second, there's no such thing as a good election story with Anthony Weiner involved at the end. And although Huma Aberdeen is her own person and she is now divorcing Anthony, that political couple did profit from their connection to the Clintons. And Huma, who has been kind of untouchable in Clinton world, is now, frankly, a liability. How they handle that will be interesting to see in the court politics of the Clinton world. So that's the big story on the email side. There's one other loose bolt, though, on this particular wing of the airplane. What'll Donald Trump do? It's been 4 days and he hasn't done anything to make the story about him. He hasn't stepped on his own message. He hasn't, in other words, been Trump. We will see if that sticks. I'm pretty amazed they kept him bottled up so far. I want to meet the pharmacist responsible because it must be a potent elixir they're slipping him. But so far, so good. He is staying more or less out of the story. But 6 days is forever in politics. This came up this weekend on Meet the Press, where I was a guest, and I borrowed an old line from my friend Dennis Miller from a few years ago and suggested they ought to hood Trump like a falcon. And so far, they're doing it. But again, 6 days and a microphone and Donald Trump, I still say law of averages. You got to bet on Trump doing something to make it all about him. And as we know in this campaign, whoever's on the front page is losing. So 6 days to go, that's the jump ball to watch. The other thing to watch beyond what candidates say is what they do. Neil Newhouse talks about this in our interview, which is coming up in a little bit, but it's a very important observation. This is the time where campaigns have to make their final decisions about resources and about schedule. The biggest resource in any campaign is the candidate's time. So where are they sending the candidates and where are they sending the top surrogates and where are they spending voter contact money? Those strategies are being put together literally today and tomorrow and Thursday as the last wave of data comes in. These campaigns are going to be very smart about where the election is, particularly the Clinton campaign, which has analytics. I think the Trump campaign still has a magic 8-ball somewhere to make strategic decisions, and Trump just flies on his gut. But to the extent they have any of that and have that sort of modern polling and analytic work, they, like the Clinton campaign, will have a pretty good picture of what's going on by Wednesday. And then they have a lot of decisions to make. You can get an early hint of it, what their thinking is now based on where the travel's been today and yesterday. The Trump campaign has been interesting. They are going to places like Michigan and Pennsylvania that are probably out of reach. Now, why would they do that with the limited number of trips they have? Well, frankly, they're counting up the votes in the Electoral College, and they know they're not there yet. Even if Trump wins Florida and Ohio and North Carolina, it's not quite enough. They have to pull a state out of Hillary's pile of pretty strong Democratic states, be it a Pennsylvania or a Michigan or a Wisconsin. Hard to do, but that's what they're trying to do, and they're chasing a lot of them. I would expect them to pick one and move there, but they're flying around trying to break her electoral chokehold. Hillary, on the other hand, is spending resources. They're upping their television in places they're probably going to win, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, to build a firewall to hold off Trump, to make it harder for him to take away what is theirs, to make it harder for him to play on their side of the field. So both campaigns are using whatever they have. Trump, the road show, where they send him. Hillary, the dollars for advertising in addition to surrogates and where her travel is. She's in Florida, a state they still think they're in the hunt with. They win Florida, the race is over. So both campaigns are making those decisions, and seeing how they evolve and where they are on Friday, Saturday, Sunday is going to be very interesting to watch. The other thing fueling all the speculation, and boy, oh boy, I'll bet the incoming phones are ringing at Hillary headquarters because people are nervous, is the polling getting a little tighter. Now, there's a tracking poll from the LA Times that most pollsters aren't paying a lot of attention to because it's a uniquely done poll. It's a panel back poll where they talk to the same people over and over again. Some people argue that lets you track the election in a cool way. Others say you sensitize those respondents too much. It's always showed Trump doing better than any other poll. That poll shows a lead for Trump. And now the ABC tracking poll, which is not a panel back and has shown big swings in the past, shows Trump up 1 point within the margin of error. Statistically, it's the same as being even or 1 point down, but it does show Trump creeping ahead a little bit. So I can tell you the phones will be ringing in Hillary world with angry people calling from the major donor community, screaming, what's going on, do something about it, because donors hate bad polling. That said, the fundamentals of the election, I'm not changing where I am. I think they still favor Hillary, though it's true the race is tightened. Now, you can do the play-at-home game here. There's a bunch of websites to do this, but I'm partial to one called 270 to Win, or you can do your own electoral college map. And I did one here because this is our last radio-free GOP broadcast before Election Day, and I'll tell you what I came up with. First of all, I ran the Trump best-case scenario that I could see being plausible. I don't think it'll happen, but I tried to take a look at a Trump path. So I took a look at the swing states, and on 270towin.com, you can color them in for each one. You can look at history. I gave Trump Florida. I gave him Ohio. I gave him Nevada, another battleground state. And I even gave him North Carolina, a little more Republican-leaning battleground state. And I gave him Iowa. I gave him all the states where he is arguably within striking distance or even has a slight advantage. The result? Hillary wins, 272 electoral votes to 264. The problem is the 38th latitude. If you draw that latitude line across the country, the north to south latitude, you will see Colorado and Virginia, both formerly swing states, both firmly in the Hillary column. That is the problem. That's why he's in Pennsylvania. That's why he's trying to pick the lock of Hillary's electoral college advantage in places like Michigan, drawing states from her, because even if he wins all the swing states, he's just not there yet. Now, then I went to the 270.com website, and I did my best gut guess right now where I think the race will be on Election Day. I gave Trump Ohio. I gave Trump North Carolina, but I gave Hillary Florida because I believe she's going to narrowly win it, and I gave Hillary Nevada. The result, 307 for Hillary, 229 for Trump. And if you give Hillary North Carolina, where I think she is in striking distance, her electoral count goes up to 322. Remember, 270 to win. Now, quick refresher course on the College of Electricians here. It is our antiquated way of actually picking the president with these electors who are chosen by state. The number of electors is the same as your sum of congressional districts, but there's a wrinkle in that the quirky, I guess, states of Nebraska and Maine split their delegations so they can have one elector to one person, one to another, that sort of thing. Well, most states are winner take all. So you win by one vote, you get all the electoral votes in that state, be it California or Rhode Island or Michigan or whatever. Only Nebraska and Maine have this system where they're not cast winner take all. So you can model it all out on 270towin.com. And the way I see it is, well, the national vote is tightened a bit. I think Hillary will win that. And I think she's going to win the College of Electricians. And I think she'll be over 300. But we will see. So that's where the race stands presidentially. Tightening, 6 days left to go. Trump may get out of his falcon hood and do something to make it worse. Hillary has more muscle demographically and an advantage in electoral college. I think she will ride that to victory, although narrow, because she is an awful candidate. These problems she has are real. The ethical blind spot is real. And I can only dream about what would be happening today if we had had a Republican candidate who was a reform conservative, who wasn't running a campaign about blaming people, but about growing the Republican Party and talking about how we can help this country get back on track, be that Jeb Bush or perhaps a John Kasich. We'd be ahead right now, and this would be a very happy podcast. Now, one more note, because I know I have a lot of listeners in the political consulting business. Boy, oh boy, the karmic laughter is ringing off the scale in D.C. because we found out in a little noticed story this week, I think it was broken in the Washington Post first, that Republican pollster Tony Fabrizio is been stiffed by the Trump campaign for $765,000 in unpaid bills. Now, it is no secret that Donald Trump takes a very laissez-faire, shall we say, approach to actually paying money he owes people. We've heard that story from contractors. We know his bondholders have been dragged through bankruptcies to settle for pennies on the dollar. This is one reason why when my conservative friends tell me, but Mike, the Supreme Court, why would we trust him on that since anybody else who ever trusted him got stiffed? Anyway, Tony Fabrizio, who's a well-known and respected Republican pollster, one of the kind of usual suspects of polling in our firm and kind of a gregarious character. I've known Tony a long time. He took the Trump money. And I have to admit, as somebody who wishes Tony no harm, but takes a dim view of people who sell out to a guy like Donald Trump for a few pieces of silver, is now looking at a big bill of $750,000 with unpaid stamped on it. Now he'll join the long line of creditors who try to squeeze a dollar out of Donald Trump. And like blood from a stone, it'll be a long road. So while I feel bad for Tony on a business level, on a karmic level, it should be a lesson to all of us. Now quickly, the down ballot races, the Senate races. 2 weeks ago, there were tears in Senateville. The things were not getting better. And the top-of-ticket effect when Hillary was running her lead up to 8 or 9 points was bad. Now the race has closed a bit. So these down-ballot Republicans are getting a second win. They now have some beef behind their message of let's put a hedge on Hillary. Let's not let her run wild with a blank check. People are not enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton. They wish they had somebody else to vote for, but the only somebody else is the Orange Menace. So she may limp across the finish line. I believe she will, but never have the down-ballot Republicans had a better argument to put a check on her and don't give the Senate into a blank check to the Democrats. Now, my brain still tells me they have the advantage to win the Senate because of the tough states we have many incumbents running for re-election in. But some of our senators in tough battles, like Senator Burr in North Carolina or Senator Blunt in Missouri, are in more Republican states that are coming back a little bit as the race tightens and Hillary hits the icebergs here. That could mean good news for them and could help them get out of danger. We will see what happens. Put a gun to my head? I still think it could be the Democrats by 1 or 2. They've got too many generic advantages. But there's no doubt my gut, which has always thought we had a shot, feels better now. I think we have more of a shot. And I think it is not over in the Senate. So some of these races could be really, really close. We will see what happens. It's going to be an exciting election night. I will be there. I'll be tweeting. I will be at NBC News. I'll be both on MSNBC and NBC doing a little broadcasting, and I'll be on the Today Show before and after the election as well as Morning Joe. So you can get my bloviating all about it on NBC next week, plus our special right after the election edition. We're going to move it back one day to Wednesday as we digest the results and everything else. So we're finally down to the voting, and it is about damn time. This depressing election is almost over. And again, the law says one of them has to win, so we will see what happens. My Vegas line remains Hillary wins, electoral count over 300, and the Senate, too close to call, slight edge to the Democrats for control, but narrowly. Okay, let's go on to do some commerce, and you will not want to skip over this because the board of directors has been dragged together yet again, and I want to talk some more about the future of Radio Free GOP. Let's pay the bills.
Mike Murphy, podcasting sanity, Radio Free GOP.
Okay, it's commerce time. Let's start at the beginning with a thank you to the Private Equity Fundcast, our original advertiser, revolutionary heroes here at Radio Free GOP. Now, look, we know all of America has been loving the Private Equity Fundcast for nearly 3 years, and we love them because, as I said, they were our first sponsor. But wait a minute, you're telling me you're not a listener yet? Well, I say get with the program. Let me tell you why. The Private Equity Fundcast is the only weekly podcast that goes behind the scenes of the global private equity industry. They are your guides, your Sherpa, your gurus. They know what they're talking about, too. It's hosted by Jim Milbury and Devin Matthews. They're two industry veterans who aren't afraid to tell you how it really works. They let you know their secrets to buying, building, and selling companies. They're very honest, they're refreshing, they're funny, and they tell you not only how the industry works, but how they execute their business inside their Chicago-based firm, Parker Gale Capital. You're going to hear about the art and science of the letter of intent, a critical document, and how to get a CEO job at a private equity-owned company. There's nothing else like the Private Equity Fundcast when it comes to the inside baseball knowledge about the huge and growing private equity industry. You ought to listen if you're in business or curious about private equity. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast listening app. One more time, that is our pals, the Private Equity Fundcast, and thank you to them. Now, one other quick plug here. Who for? Oh, you know, those cheapskates at Ricochet, because Radio Free GOP is brought to you in part by Ricochet.com, the smartest and most civil center-right community on the web. No trolls, they guarantee it. You become a member, you let your voice be heard, and you listen to great podcasts or even so-so podcasts like this one, all for just $5 a month. And now, look, Radio Free GOP listeners get their first month free. Go to ricochet.com/join. That's ricochet.com/join and sign up today. Now, guess what? Those are our final ads for this episode. We have turned down other ad contracts. Yes, they're knocking on our door. There's a certain mattress that we might be talking about. We love the Great Courses Plus. They're great. That's a product I really believe in. I'm looking for one of the gold coin companies because we all know when the zombie apocalypse comes, the flesh-eating horde is going to stop at your door, knock politely, and ask if they can negotiate civilly with you over gold coins. They're not going to make a helmet out of your face. No, that's just on the movies. They're going to be very nice zombies, and they like to trade in gold. But anyway, we're holding off on all that because, as I told the Radio Free GOP board of directors when I went down to the off-track betting parlor and dragged them outside into the sun as they squinted and mumbled about more liquor, I told that gutter snipe crew that we are trying a new model here because before I take new ad contracts, I want to see how a listener-supported model works. That means you guys go to radiofreegop.com and click that little PayPal button and give us a few shekels. You can do it on a recurring basis. You can fork over $19.95 a month and turn it off anytime you want. You can do a one-time gift. There are a whole bunch of levels and a whole bunch of options. We put the money back into the podcast. Now look, I am happy to flood this thing of advertising, and I make one guarantee: no scruples or take anything. I mean, I'm a political consultant, not the Pope. But we wanted to try this listener direct model first because before we can sign up for any long-term ad contracts, I've got to figure out how often to do this thing. The election is about to end, and while we are going to do a super episode right after the election on Wednesday, probably Wednesday night, with all the results and some interpretation and a discussion of where the party goes, the focus of the podcast is going to shift to the battle for the soul of the party. And while people on the grievance right have a ton of media outlets, a whole business, more or less, of it, we don't have a lot of that in the reasonable, sensible, reformed conservative world. So if you want to be part of that, it is time to sign up. So we're going to conduct this little test. We're going to have another broadcast of Freedom and the Truth right after the election. Then we're going to go on hiatus for a week or two because we all get to take a vacation, and then we will be back for the Republican wars of the future. Will it be weekly? Will it be bi-weekly? I'm not sure. We're still figuring that out, and part of that thought process is to see how we do with listener support. So if you like the podcast, and I sure do appreciate your listening and all the support, I appreciate the merch that some of you have bought on radiofreegop.com, the famous Orange Menace t-shirt, the upside down logo t-shirt, some of the stuff like that. I want to see what kind of listener support we have, and then we'll make some decisions, and then we'll decide just how much advertising to take. Okay? That's the plan. The board of directors nodded their approval. They really just wanted to get back to the bar at the off-track betting parlor. It is not the most august group we have, but that's the story, and I wanted you to hear it from me. I want to thank the people who've been doing that. We've gotten $1,000 contributions from 2 different people. We got $100 from somebody, and we have a whole bunch of you who've done small amounts on a recurring basis. It all means a lot to us, and I want to thank the people who've answered our call. But we're only raising about a third of what we need to cover our actually quite tidy costs. So if you like the podcast and want to underwrite it, check out that PayPal button, or you can click the Amazon button. So when you purchase something on Amazon, and I don't want to know what it is, I know we have some consenting adults who listen to our podcast, we get a little taste. We get our beak wet. So on every level, be it merch, be it the all-important PayPal button, or some of this Amazon stuff, I do appreciate the support. We put the money right back into the podcast. So that does it. The commerce section is over. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for the support. And now, the fun stuff. We get to go back to the podcast.
Radio Free GOP.
Well, with all the polling in the news, why not talk to a pollster? So I got one of the greats, Neil Newhouse, a partner in the respected Republican firm of Public Opinion Strategies. As the podcast rolls on, we're going to be talking to more and more pollsters. Some of my best friends are pollsters, I am embarrassed to admit. But Neil is a great old pal of mine, and he's been at this polling game a long time, so we're going to talk to him about how he got to do what he does, how polling works, how it's changed, because he and I have worked together for decades, and where this crazy election might be going in just 6 days. So without any more delay, here's my chat with the one and only Neil Newhouse.
It's time to ask some questions and go behind the scenes. Here's our latest interview. We'll try to keep it clean. Radio Free GOP.
We are here with Neil Newhouse, an old and dear friend of mine. Neil, thank you for doing Radio Free GOP.
A pleasure. Thanks, Mike.
Neil, as I said in the longer intro before this, is a famous GOP pollster, and we're going to talk about the polling this year and, of course, the election that's now only a week or less away. But first, I always ask people the same question, and Neil, since we're both old ancients in this business, we both started around the same time. How did you get into this?
Oh, God, Mike. We really are old. I wasn't really interested in politics when I was in high school or growing up. I grew up right outside of Kansas City, and but I went to college, went to Duke, and kind of followed the presidential election in, God help us, 1972. I liked kind of like the competitive nature of politics. I was a good high school athlete, but was not big enough, strong enough, fast enough, tall enough to play anything in college, but that competitive spirit kind of still, held me. And here, interesting story. My sophomore year at Duke, 1972, we had two pollsters come down in October, right before the election, to talk to a group of students about the election. It was Pat Goodell and Peter Hart.
Oh, wow!
I know, and so I paid attention. This was kind of interesting. So I kind of gravitated to that. Took some courses in voting behavior. I actually did a poll. Went door to door interviewing people. Believe it or not, way back then.
That's the classic way. Talk about old school.
Mike, it was there was an old Republican congressman by the name of Vinegar Bend Mizell, Wilmer Vinegar Bend Mizell, who had been a Major League Baseball player. I still remember the candidate.
It's a great name.
So I did that, ended up going to grad school, University of Virginia, and kind of migrated to Washington and found a job at working the phones and the phone banks for the RNC, raising money for Mary Louise Smith in 1975, which is the year after Watergate, Mike. Needless to say, it was not I did the best I could, but it was a tough time. But
what's funny is the phone bank is still there, but now it's the email bank. Seriously, they brought me in way back 2 years ago because they know that I'm always an opinionated pain in the neck, and they said, Mike, we want to show you our cool digital operation. So I roll into the RNC, and they have this beautiful room with all these kids on laptops, essentially tracking and fine-tuning the email campaign for money. And I couldn't help but laugh from back in the early 80s when I was a chairman of the Georgetown College Republicans. We were staffing the phone bank of kids in a big room in the same building doing exactly the same thing of telephones instead of digital text. So everything changes and nothing changes.
And the scary thing for me is the same security guard's still there too, which is like, oh my God.
He didn't like you then either. Newhouse, I'm watching you.
The guy who supervised the phone bank said, hey, you know what? They have internships upstairs. You got to look into it. I looked into it, ended up getting an internship in survey research since that'd been my kind of like, what I liked. And my intern coordinator was Carl Rove.
Oh, my God. It is such a small world in our business.
Yeah. So anyway, I kind of went from there and ended up working for Dick Worthland, who did Reagan's polling in the 80s. And then we started our firm, Public Opinion Strategies, in 91. and it's been 25 years now. So it's I think I'm going to stick for a while.
Well, let's talk about Dick Werflin for a while, because he and Bob Teeter were kind of the first two famous Republican pollsters. Teeter from Market Opinion Research in my hometown of Detroit, and Dick Werflin, who came out from, I think they did a lot in Southern California, but he was from Salt Lake, I believe, but you would know better than I did. And he came in with Ronald Reagan.
And then there was also, I would also say there's a third, Arthur Finkelstein.
Oh, that's true. Arthur, and to some extent Lance Tarrant, too.
Yeah, so I mean, but Lance worked for Werflin at one point in time. So
he did. Okay.
Yeah, Werflin, but Werflin's was he's LDS Mormon, and he was a BYU prof. Started his company. He did Reagan's polling as governor, and brought him to Washington. It's just working for Werflin was an incredible experience. That was a lot of fun.
He was a very kind and gracious man. Later. Well, still in the late 80s, 90s, I bought a house out in the suburbs, and down the street lived Dick Werflin, who was very nice and gracious to me. We had a party, and I was, young, and it was a younger party, but he came by and managed not to be too, he was so polite, managed not to be too horrified by all the, 30-year-olds and 28-year-olds running around drunk. But he...
I think it was simply he was entertained by us. I mean, he liked being around younger people because it gave him energy, but he was entertained, and he had a huge family. I mean, he had 7 kids or so, and all extremely sharp, really bright people, and just a joy to be around. But Dick was very kind, was a terrific guy, and it was a great learning experience.
And Bill McInturff was there too, right? It was now one of your partners at POS.
I brought in McInturff, and then Glenn Bolger was a project director for us.
He was.
And as was Gene Ohm. We hired Gene Ohm. Okay, this story gets better. We hired Gene Ohm. Frank Luntz worked
I was about to ask. I hold you responsible. It's your fault.
Oh God, I took him to his first focus group. My partners will never let me live that down. And Kellyanne Conway was an intern of mine.
Oh, really? Because then she worked for Luntz, right? I mean, I thought...
I know. Well, so here's the backstory on Kellyanne Conway, which is really funny. The resume comes in over the transom, I think. I don't know how we ended up with the resume, but this woman's resume included that she had been, Phi Beta Kappa, she'd been Miss Teenage New Jersey, and she was the blueberry packing champion in New Jersey.
I remember that part, yeah.
I looked at this as we have to interview this person. We do have some stars that started there and went elsewhere, so it's worked out pretty well.
Was she a good intern? Was she a hard worker, or did she immediately run for the first person with orange-dyed hair and start telling them they ought to be president? No, I'm just teasing.
She was terrific, but we had some good talent.
Is the story true about Frank set up a phone bank in Israel and then started doing polling, and you guys had to send somebody from the home office to tamp it down a little bit? Because Frank was always a hustler, even as a kid. I remember meeting him back then.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember him offering us what was it? His dream in life back then was he just wanted to be mentioned in Hotline, which was the daily political publication. His dream was just to get his name in Hotline. He was a hustler. He was interested in trying to get ahead, and so we tried to keep him in line as best we could.
Well, we were all ambitious young punks back then. God, I remember the Hotline. The Hotline was this thing National Journal put out every day through the miracle of the internet, which you would then print out. And it was like a 30-page summary of the day's story. Later, they went to an HTML format. But originally, it was like in Courier type, but it had clips of everything in politics from around the country, and it had a little bit of kind of analysis. It was a summary. Now every network puts one of these out, but it was kind of the morning Bible, and you paid a lot of money to get it. And then I remember it would be printed out and distributed in the offices, and being mentioned in it was a big thing. But it was a great one-source way to read everything, and it had a young political nerd editor with a couple other political nerds working for him who were all like 12 years old. Do you happen to remember that kid's name?
Chuck something or other.
Yeah, what was it? Chuck Todd. Oh God, I remember the Hotline. And Vaughn Berbers was there, all of them.
And we used to get it. I think it was 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning. We used to get that thing, and you'd wait for it every day, and and see what the latest was in all the races across the country. This before we had internet. I mean, this is it was invaluable. But hey, Mike, do you remember this? Do you remember just a few years after that? when they started distributing all the TV ads that came out that entire week, and you'd get a VHS tape on Friday
Yes.
of all the TV ads. What we would do is we had like pizza lunch every Friday during the fall campaign, and we'd bring everybody in, and we'd watch all the TV ads from every campaign that were new that week, based on the hotline stuff.
Oh yeah, we would too. It would too. It was interesting, and God, I'm going to sound like an old fart now. But back then, we had the ability of electronic communication to know things quickly, and the hotline, which had it was curated, so it was well synthesized. But you could read that every day. You'd know pretty much everything that was going on in all the races based on the local reporting, which was then done back then by gruff old reporters who, in most, not all cases, but most, really knew their state. So you could be pretty smart on the campaigns. And then ads would run for a week, so the pace was a little slower now. People say, well, now that thanks to technology, everything happens in real time. The problem with everything happening in real time is there's not as much strategy. You get buried in so much information, it's kind of harder to tell the forest from the trees. It was cleaner and simpler back then, and frankly, it was a lot more fun.
But Mike, back then, it was even more than that. Back then, it was my campaign versus your campaign. Right. Mano a mano. Now it's my campaign and all my buddies, all my allies, all my super PACs against yours. So it's no longer you versus me. You no longer can like map out a message progression.
Right.
It's so much different nowadays simply because of all the third party groups in the campaigns.
And you could plan to things like a heist. All right, we're going to make this move, and they're going to make one of these two moves, and then we're ready for that, and then we flip this. And there was really kind of some dance and strategy to it. And it was still the same thing. We were getting 3 hours sleep. We're flying around the country, working all night, in our case, in edit suites, in your case, in the polling, data compilation. So we were all young guys having a great time, and it was very social, and it had all the high energy and octane it does now. But the strategies could be a little more complex because, as you say, there are two teams on the field. Now what drives me the craziest, it's been great for the business. Everybody's made more money because we have 1 million IE groups running around. But dumb IEs come in and there's no policing them. Yet your campaign is held responsible. So it's like playing football where halfway through they release 2 other teams and 14 mental patients with chainsaws, and everybody's running around, and you're trying to do the old pull right play, and somebody just pulled out a snake and threw it at the quarterback. I mean, it's anarchy now with 3 times the money, and I don't think the campaigns are particularly more elegant or strategically that much challenging. It's more of a madhouse.
Yeah, and it's more volume of campaign than it is anything else, which
right.
is different from what it was, when we were younger, growing up in this business.
How else do you think it's changed in your world of polling? Because in the old days, the telephone polling was pretty accurate because you could get everybody on the phone.
Okay, so the first thing is, you'll get a kick out of this too. Back when we started, when we would gear up for the fall campaign, we would, we'd lease another, big copier, so we had another copy machine, and we would lease 2 more fax machines.
Right.
Because we would fax out every morning the charts and tables in the day. We'd literally fax it out. It's like, are you kidding me? So number one is electronics has digital era has changed everything in terms of our turnaround, in terms of when people get data and all that. But it's also changed how we do the business. I mean, we're making 40% of our phone calls are now done by cell, and it's extraordinarily more expensive. It's much more difficult. It takes more time. And you see from the polling that's being done now and being released in this presidential race, these polls are all over the damn lot.
Right.
I mean, it's there's not a lot of consistency out there.
My theory is the sample frame is all over the damn lot, and quotas are not always strictly enforced because these media polls are often the lowest possible bid and the quickest possible turnaround, and that is not a helper in accurate polling.
And Mike, the media polls, there's only one media poll in the country, I think, that uses actual, voter lists.
Right.
And that's New York Times, I guess, Marist poll, but that's it. There's one. And this is, something we've been doing for years, especially after the 2012 presidential election. But Democrats have been doing it for years as well. I mean, you're calling off a list.
Yeah,
and
we should talk about that a little bit for the listenership. In the old days, it was a thing called random digit dialing. So you might want to walk through kind of how that's changed and why.
Yeah, I mean, the random digit dialing, because of the number of unlisted numbers, because of the challenge in getting people and having accurate lists of voters, which we really didn't have for years, we would buy samples of random digit phone numbers. So they would the sample center would randomly change the last two numbers of a telephone number, and so you'd go through literally lots of phone calls to try to complete interviews with people from this random digit sample.
Because that theory was that way you get people who are unlisted. So you take an exchange, let's say you're at 818541, and then it would randomize the last four digits a couple of times, so you had a certain number of people from that exchange, and you'd work out until you covered the whole sampling area.
Yeah, and that was a standard way of doing it. As you have your RDD sample, random digit dialing. But in recent years, the quality of the lists, of the voter lists, have significantly improved. There are now telephone numbers attached to that. And now, remember 10 years ago when we all had cell phones, nobody wanted to give their cell phone number up for fear that, that's your private number. You don't want to give that away. And now,
and it was $4 a minute to use the damn thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Back in the year, I used to have one of those shoe phones, and it was great, but the bill was ridiculous because I kept calling people on it.
Yeah, and so now you give your cell phone out for everything. So cell phones are on the voter lists. The voter lists are updated. They are now appended with lots of other information about that individual voter: past voting history, income, education level, subscriptions, just tendencies. And so when you then dial off a voter list, you're able to take your data and kind of append it back to who this voter is, what this voter is all about, what drives that person, and then extrapolate to other voters. So you want to be dialing off a voter list now rather than doing the random digit dialing.
Right. It was like shooting fish in the barrel. I mean, I remember when calling the primary voter list. We actually had a list of people who voted in primaries who were a unique species, and so trying to get them with random digit dialing was so hard. So it was a great big revolution in primaries when we had primary lists that were good enough. You could actually call the voters you knew were going to vote in the primary and get much better data. And now that's expanded to the general because technology has given us voter list and voter data in a place where we can call people, other than the problem of getting them to answer the phone because the baby's crying and both their parents are working, and those double working adult families still remain tricky to get, but now we call their cell phone and other tricks you guys have to try to get them.
Make no mistake, it's still extraordinarily tough. I mean, the do not call list has actually helped us a little bit because we're not impacted by that. But people are screening their phone calls. They don't be bothered with poll calls, and so we kind of sometimes try to disguise it. Opinion survey kind of thing. I mean, you want to use a local number as your caller ID if you can when it shows up in the phone. But it's tough getting people to respond to polling.
So when people see a poll in the newspaper, and let's take out all the polls that aren't even voter lists, so very few, like you guys and the POS Peter Hart polls for the Wall Street Journal or the NBC Marist stuff. So when they're calling a voter list, how many actual calls does the phone center have to make to get, say, 800 people to complete it, so you see a sample of 800 in the newspaper?
Mike, that's a tough question, but you may make as many as 40,000 phone calls.
Wow. So
it's very tough, and that impacts the accuracy of the polling and impacts kind of margin of error to some extent. But you're making that's why polling done right is so expensive.
Right, because you have to do that field work to get it, and it's not just 800 people. You have to make sure it's approximately, even by sex, or at least it matches what we think the electorate is. You have what are called quotas in polling to make sure each subset of the population is well represented.
You do. I mean, if you're doing a poll in Pennsylvania, for instance, you want to make sure a certain number of interviews come from the Philadelphia DMA and specifically Philadelphia City. You want to make sure the sample is 53 female, 47 male, and make sure there's 12 to 15% African American, whatever the numbers are. And in Pennsylvania, you've actually got party registration in the state, so you know what the actual registration numbers are, and you need to come relatively close to that. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge, though, is, okay, so who actually votes? You've got an accurate sample of who's registered to vote. Then the question is, who's actually going to vote in this election? That's even a greater challenge.
Right, and that's where sometimes the modeling based on income and other things comes into play when you guys actually analyze the numbers once they're back from the field. Let me ask you a question about one of my favorite kind of things. There's always now, because we have the magic interweb those kids like so much, the ability to kind of have these online debates about, oh, that poll's wrong. And what people like to do is they take a look at the party ID question and compare it to past exit polls or something to say, ooh, this poll is 8 points too Democratic. That's why our guy is 9 points behind. But the party ID question is not always the same as the registration question. And which party people identify with is a flexible thing based on, gee, the Republicans ticked me off today. Can you talk a little bit about sometimes how people get that confused when they look at these polls and cry foul?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, many people cry foul simply because all the national polls now are interviewing more Democrats and Republicans. Well, there's a reason for that. There are more Democrats and Republicans in the country. I mean, it's right. The data indicates that. I mean, it's like a 8-point margin or so. So that's one reason. When we look at polling data for an individual state, you always tend to go back, just as you said, Mike, and go to the exit poll data from the previous presidential election. And if Ohio was 8 points Democrat, then you look at your current data and you figure, well, if it's not 8-point Democratic lead, then the numbers aren't right. But partisan affiliation, especially like in a party ID state like Ohio, and party ID state means you do not have to register by party. There's not party registration by partisanship. And party ID state like Ohio, those numbers do change depending on how popular John Kasich is or unpopular is, or depending on what's going on in the state, depending on the national political environment, how people feel about Barack Obama. So it's a floating number, and you've got to that makes it more of a gut call. That's why, when Quinnipiac does a survey, Quinnipiac lets their party numbers float. In other words, they do not rate by party in an individual state. That accounts for some concern among pollsters who look at that data and say, well, it can't be right because they've got party ID even in Ohio, and we know it's at least -4 to -6 to -8 Democrat, and yet they're trying to take a snapshot of likely voters in that state right now, and they're capturing it at dead even or a point Republican, and they're reporting it. So it's
and the truth is somewhere in the middle. I always use the analogy. It's like 10 years ago, I was a huge Pittsburgh Pirates fan, but then they got the new coach, and I'm not such a fan anymore. So, you poll me now, and I say I'm not a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, but Mike, you had season tickets for 5 years. You're lying. The poll's wrong. No. People change a little bit with time. So the truth is somewhere between what they say right now and their history, because sometimes people do revert to their history. It's much trickier than people think to project this stuff.
When we ask in our surveys party registration, we ask regardless of how you may feel now.
Right.
Are you registered? That's like I don't give a damn by which I don't care who you're pissed off at, whatever. But what would the registration figure the rolls show you registered to vote as? So we can kind of validate a sample, because when you do a poll, you've got to have a sense that this really does fit the district or the state or the country. And everybody forgets there's a margin of error in these surveys of plus or minus 3, 4, 5 points, 95 out of 100 times. Well, okay, guys, what happens those other 5 times?
Yeah, every once in a while, yeah.
Every once in a while, I mean, and there's no red flag that goes up, hey, this is one of those 5 times, heads up.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have a sense, these numbers don't look right, and kind of adjust or redo the survey.
A pollster friend of mine said, hey, people, isn't it enough of a miracle we can interview 1,200 people and pretty much know what the entire damn country is thinking almost all the time? Isn't that enough of a miracle for you? The fact that it's not completely precise and perfect all times for all people, okay, sorry, airplanes are pretty cool, but they go down once in a while.
There was a great analogy. People ask me, like, how can you interview 800 people and get a sense of what's going on in the country? I said, well, here's the best analogy. When you go to the doctor and went for the last physical, they didn't have to drain all the blood from your body to figure out what blood type you were, did they? It's like they get pale. It's like, oh yeah, okay, good point.
That's a good one.
You're taking a sampling. That's all you're doing.
You ever heard Melman's joke about polling? He goes back to Cleveland and his mom tells everybody, my son's a pollster, and everybody says sofas or chairs. Old school polling joke.
No. My wife Mary got that here in Alexandria. She was at a women's giving circle organizing luncheon kind of thing, and she's exchanging chit chat with these this woman ahead of time, and the woman asked Mary, what does your husband do? And she says, he's a pollster. And she just hesitated a second. Now, keep in mind, Alexander is like the capital political consultant. Right. I mean, every Republican, pollster is located in town. Anyway, so she says he's a pollster, and the woman just hesitated for a second and said, well, that must be great. You get all your chairs redone for free. It's a true story.
Yeah, no. It's tell the story about the time Elmo Roper and George Gallup walked into a bar later. Let's talk a little bit about the big finish to your career here, POS. You guys are big in the Republican world, and you do a lot of corporate and kind of nonpartisan polling. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you guys founded the firm and how it grew?
We founded the firm in 91. McIndoff and I were at the Wortham Group, and it was one of these, issues where, we wanted to kind of start our own thing and own something, and didn't think we could do it there. We had a very gracious parting of the ways with Dick Worthland, and we were going to at first kind of set up a little offshoot of his company and be a subsidiary of his, but then he finally said he can't give away his political business, and he told us, wished us good luck and said we're going to be very successful, and off we went. So we brought Glenn Bolger was at the Congressional Campaign Committee. Bill and I had worked for years. I'd worked with Glenn for years, and the three of us started and kind of hit the ground running. Within a week, we had about 10 members of Congress on board, and we've never really looked back. I never dreamed, Mike, I would actually make a living doing polling. This was not in the plans, but it's worked out well. So now we do a ton of political work, a lot of, the fun kind of corporate stuff includes NFL, AT&T, Walmart. It's just that kind of stuff. We've done work overseas in other countries. It's been a ton of fun, and we've had an impact on the party and on our candidates and the associations we work for.
Well, I think you guys have, along with a few of the other big firms, but you've become kind of an institutional asset to the party. And I've always thought you guys do a good job of bringing on new generations of talent. You've got the very capable Robert Blizzard working with you, and I know other partners have done that with other people as well. So you've kind of been a university for Republican pollsters.
We have started a few in their own businesses, but Blizzard's a stud. His dad and I worked together back in New York State Assembly days back in the 70s, and I've known him literally since the day he was born, and he started working for us as an intern when he was like 15 or 16 years old. And he's not a rising star. He's already a star. He's got
a bright future in this business. Yeah. Now, we have both, this is how pathetic this is. We can each sit down and say, oh, remember the time we were doing that race in Yankton, South Dakota? Or I wonder if that diner's still there in Gulfport, Mississippi, or, right on the Canadian border to Maine. You see the world doing this, and you have a lot of war stories and stuff like that. Do you have a favorite state to work in, or a couple favorites that just the political culture of that state has been kind of fun, or it's been meaningful in your career?
I would say Connecticut and Ohio are probably my two favorite states to work in.
Now, Connecticut, because you like to see the criminal justice system in action, probably. The old Waterbury gang.
Oh, my God. Connecticut, when I worked for the Republican National Committee in the late 70s, I worked in local elections campaign division. In other words, we did state house and state senate races. And my region of the country was New York, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And Connecticut was just, 169 towns in the state. It was a fun state to work, and you learned a ton from all the different campaigns, and you could drive the entire state from one end to the other in an afternoon, basically. The Republican Party chairman, Fred Biebel, was an institution. He was the chairman of all the state chairmen, and I had an opportunity to work with him. It was just a great experience. And then Ohio's, I spent the end of the 1980 election in Ohio, the last 3 weeks of that campaign, and I have adopted it practically as my second home state. We do a ton of work there, from state legislative races to congressional to statewide, and it's a terrific microcosm in the country, and it's a joy to work. And there's a lot of talent, political talent, coming out of that state. There are a lot of people in that state who have decided not to leave Ohio, but could compete on the national level with the best consultants across the country.
Yeah, no, it has very advanced politics. It is a true swing state. And there's no better place. And I'd even widen this to include Michigan, Pennsylvania, and at least in the old days, Illinois, as those industrial states in the Great Lakes are a great place to learn politics. Because you got strong Democratic operations, you got strong Republican operations, at least we did. You learn about states that are on the fulcrum where you don't just win by getting your folks to vote.
Well, when we're talking about learning politics, I learned it in New Jersey and New York.
Right.
New Jersey ran a congressional race in 1976, and we ended up winning. If you can work politics in New York and New Jersey, you can probably work almost any place in the country. I mean, it's pretty hardball, pretty tough stuff.
Yeah, those New Jersey assembly races. I have worked with a lot of guys who got started doing that, including Matt Leonardo, who works with me at Revolution, and that is quite a training course. I was giving a little free advice to a New Jersey politician a few days ago. I was in New York, a block away from Trump Tower. The undisclosed location was perilously close, and it was pretty funny because it brought back a lot of memories from when I worked for Christine Todd Whitman up there, which it is a tough state.
That was the one race I wish I'd had a chance to work with you on. That would have been fun.
We had a lot of fun, particularly the first one where we were the insurgent. It's a great state to be an insurgent in. Can you think back to a couple of campaigns that were real turning points in your career as a pollster? Either for the good or the bad, like, a loss you regret or a win that was like, we've all had, and you were on one of mine. We worked for Jeb together in '98 in Florida, the great comeback. And
yeah,
that was a great race.
Yeah, that was a fun race. It was you and me and Sally.
Right.
That was fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. For me, it's mostly the governor's races.
Yeah, I agree. They're the most fun statewide.
They are. Working for Bill Graves in Kansas was just a great time.
Here's a poll for you. Stack 'em tight and high. Do I have that right?
Yeah, high and tight.
High and tight, right.
High and tight. Because
you should explain that because people are going to think we're drunk now. Not that
Bill
we
Graves,
aren't.
Yeah, I know. Bill Graves is running for governor of Kansas, and he was Secretary of State, and he came from a trucking family. And it was always, and kind of like he was always taught when working on the trucks to stack the boxes in the truck high and tight. And this became, through Paul Wilson did the media, became kind of the slogan for the campaign, because that's what he's going to do for state government. He's going to high and tight. In other words, he's going to be frugal. He's going to, pay attention to details, and he's going to not waste money or space. And that became, his theme for the campaign. I think it was 94 and he ran, and we didn't realize what an incredible year 94 was going to be. We did the first survey after the primary. He barely squeaked through the primary in August, and he's running against Jim Slattery, who was a Republican congressman, Democratic congressman in the state. Everybody thought we'd be behind. We were ahead by 10 points.
He was a star dem, Slattery.
Yeah,
all the hype was Slattery.
I think Melman was actually doing the polling, and we didn't want to. We knew that it would be huge news if people thought we were ahead. So we decided we weren't going to release the poll. We're going to talk about it or anything about it, and just let everybody else figure it out. When they would figure it out. And so it was like a month later before the other side even figured out they were behind, I think. and so Bill Graves went under 2 terms. He was a terrific governor. But I like the governor's races. Mike, for me, the guys who want to run for governor. First of all, anybody who wants to run for office, I tip my hat to, because they're putting themselves out there. But governors want to change things. They want to do stuff. They're impatient. They're change agents. And they're issue-oriented. They're trying to get stuff done. I really like that. And I like working for those guys who are after that. And it's guys like Jeb Bush, was terrific that way. Bill Graves was. John Rowland was in Connecticut for his first couple of times. So, those are the guys I like to work for.
Yeah, governors too, not always, but most of the time they're a higher level of political animal. Nothing wrong with the senators, but governors are, state house politics are never dull. Most of them are pretty experienced in it, and I agree. There's a certain drama, and once the governor's elected, then you're often involved in the politics of the incumbent governor, which are always interesting, and there's always a lot of stuff going on. Now, do you have a couple of races where you didn't quite make it that kind of gnaw at you?
Mitt Romney.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly.
That breaks my heart. I moved to Boston for a little over a year to work on that campaign. I had made incredible friendships and relationships there, and Mitt is. You and I worked Mitt's
Yeah, we did the governor's race together. So
when they invented Time Machine, I'm going to go back and do that campaign over again. That one is a bitter disappointment. And
he's such a good guy. He's such a good guy. And the inaugural guest on Radio Free GOP, by the way, launching our little newspaper, folded newspaper ship of the podcast seas right here.
The other ones are one of the keys to being effective in this business, and you've run into this, is you may know exactly the right thing to do. You may know the right strategy. You may know, the ad you want to run. But if you can't talk the campaign into doing it, if you can't convince them this is the right path, then you're worthless. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. And so,
right. That's why I alternate between being a con man and a dictator, depending what I think will work better.
I know. Well, I know. I mean, and you've got the reputation of like it's my way or that's it. But as a pollster, you can't really do that. And
right.
My frustration is I haven't been able to, in a couple of races, convince people the right way. I mean, like Peter Blute in Massachusetts. Peter Blute ran for Congress. I mean, it was elected to Congress in a very Republican year. It might have been 94, and won overwhelmingly. And when you win overwhelmingly in a very Republican year, you think you tend to kind of want to replicate your campaign. But when the next year came around and he's being tied to Newt Gingrich and being attacked, and there's just a sense that, I didn't have to run a negative campaign last time. I don't have to do it now. So it was my inability to convince people of kind of the right direction to take in some of these campaigns that were probably my most frustrating moments. How about yours, Mike?
Oh, God, I got a couple. Every campaign is in love with the rearview mirror. They always remember the last win and want to do it over again, and the world changes. I've got a couple that bug me. Some bug me just because I hated losing. Other times bug me when I think we could have done a better job. I mean, I've had a pretty good record, luckily, so I don't have that many that I have to obsess about, but there are always a few. McCain 2000, that was a storybook campaign, and he would have been, I think, a really good president. Spence Abraham's reelect in the Michigan Senate, just because he was a close friend of mine.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we won out of nowhere in the first time, and then on the second time, the reelect, it was hard. The Bush guys pulled out of Michigan, so generically it was falling apart. That's a hard state in a presidential year to begin with.
Spence was a quality guy.
He was a quality guy, and he was a very good senator. I don't think he really enjoyed the home retail stuff that much. We had a tough call to make because there was a lot of pressure on us. We had a slave reparation vote on her, and to his credit, he didn't want to, finish the campaign on a race war. It was deadly in the polling for Stabenow, but, Spence just didn't want to be that guy, and I can really respect him for it. That one bugs me that we lost. And then, of course, this podcast is part of my rage therapy at the Republican primary. After the Jeb Prime, which we worked together on, we're both Jeb Bush guys, and we went off to do the Super PAC together, and it was not the year for the thoughtful guy who wanted to unite the country and reform conservatism, but, we gave it a good try. But, yeah, it bugs me that we couldn't put that together, and I think of all the things we could have done different, and I think of all the different ways I think we would have lost. But how about you? What's your look back at the presidential primary? Let's pivot to the present, talk about that, and then we'll talk about the general election only a week away.
Yeah, like you, I've gone back and kind of replayed that where we were in the primary, and I think the one of the keys for us was when Trump rose and hit mid-20s or 30s, and we fell from the 25 mark down all the way to 9 eventually by fall. That kind of spelled the end for us right there. I mean, it's just once voters moved away from Jeb, we just couldn't win them back.
When they figured out there was something else in the market that was a little more the grievance stuff they were looking for, and Cruz just never could put the ideological hit on Trump that would stick, which we all kind of thought he would. We thought, okay, Cruz has him on all the liberal stuff, that ought to get that vote moved where it ought to go, and nada.
But yeah, this was not an ideological election. I mean, when you have evangelicals voting for Donald Trump, you have conservatives and moderates or somewhat conservatives voting for him. I remember the survey we did the summer of 2015. We tested every known negative against Donald Trump, and I say known negative because, yeah, I mean, we certainly don't have access to Access Hollywood, for God's sake.
They didn't even know. They found it internally, a month before it popped out.
Yeah, for somebody to criticize us in terms of, oh, yeah, you didn't do your job in Oppo research. Oh, no, we did. And we tested all that stuff. And what was really interesting is nothing moved Trump voters away from Trump. They were rock solid.
In that like 26%, he hadn't grown yet, but he had that nugget. So our theory was, okay, get the other 3/4 and surround him over time. But then he grew, which was the amazing thing to me.
I've heard, why didn't you attack him? And so I try to explain, you attack another candidate for one of two reasons. You attack him so that his voters come to you. Well, that sure as hell wasn't happening. I mean, Trump voters were never going to vote for Jeb.
It was the biggest predictor. They hated us more than anybody.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
Because Jeb ate with a knife and fork and a lot of other offensive behavior.
Or you attack him because, you want to attract Chris Christie voters or Kasich voters or Marco voters to your, you voters in your lane to you because you're taking him on. But all of our testing didn't indicate that. So attacking Donald Trump for us didn't,
Well, you know how it works. It's the mythology of the rearview mirror again. Well, if Napoleon only had nuclear subs, then he would have, conquered Russia. It's not the reality.
People forget our job was we're trying to elect Jeb Bush.
I know. I'm not Reince Priebus.
Yeah, exactly.
The nightmare I have all the time, and tell me what you think, because you may disagree, but I do the one day drink when I think about it, and then we get out of our therapy here and go on to the present, because the primary voters vote for what they want. They did. Now they got it. But I always think about, okay, knowing what we knew now, if we had the time machine, forget the time machine where I go back and tell Fred Trump not to be such an a-hole to his kid, because I hold him responsible for a lot of this. But we go back and we hold a meeting, and we haul in the Kasich Super PAC, we haul in the Marco Super PAC and the Marco Dark Money Committee. Between them, they had $65 million, by the way, so the idea we were the only guys with money is crazy. We haul in the Christie Super PAC that has a couple $1 million. We haul in, hell, I don't know, even if Scott Walker had been alive then. Yeah. We haul in everybody and the Mercer Super PACs. We get Kellyanne Conway and the other, there were like three of them. I don't know if they were speaking. But we haul them all in a room, and we say, hey, this Trump guy is a big problem. And everybody would laugh and say he's not going anywhere and we're going to kill him ideologically. But we say, no, we can see the future and he's going to grow. So trust us. Here's the deal. We want to spend $20 million killing Trump. So we will write a check for $10 million right here out of Right to Rise if you five guys together come up with another 10, and we'll hire some third party to go do a number on Trump for the good of the order and the Republican Party. What do you think they would have said in that meeting when they had to write their own money, not just tell them it's our problem?
They'd say, you may be right, Mike. Go for it, and we'll see how you do.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a coffee cup and $20. We're in.
And you know what? I don't think it made a damn bit of difference, truthfully.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it would. I mean, this was. You look at all the data, look at all the exit poll data, and how upset and ticked off Republican primary voters were, and Donald Trump embodied kind of that resentment, that anti-establishment sentiment. He had as poorly as he is reading the general electorate right now, I think he did an extraordinary job of reading Republican primary voters.
Yeah, he was willing to embrace the horror of the total meltdown while we were all trying to think around it. Because I don't think anybody smart in our business, or at least 90% of them, really thought if Trump was a nominee, he'd have a realistic chance of winning, because he's everything the general election voters, he's offended everybody he needs. But in the primary, he hit that 44% sweet spot, no doubt about it. And here we are.
Yeah.
So here we are. What do you think we're going to see here? This is Tuesday, so 1 week from today, when America votes, although they've started voting, we probably got 25 million votes already cast. Do you have a prediction? I won't pin you down in a crazy year to get exact, but if you had to bet on a candidate, who's going to most likely to win the election?
Number one, I wouldn't bet, but yeah. I think Hillary is going to limp her way to the finish line, but this race has narrowed. And it's narrowed as of last Friday with the kind of Comey surprise that came out. It was the end of a very bad week for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. And we know whenever one of them is in the news for a week, they go down. The country hates them both.
They do. And people ask me, okay, so Neil, what about the undecided voters? I said, okay, well, let's take a look at that. Last NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, about 13 to 15% of voters were either undecided or voting for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein. Among those voters, that 13 to 15% of the electorate, both Hillary and Donald Trump had a 7% favorable and greater than a 70% unfavorable. In other words, they don't want to vote for either one of these two guys.
Yeah, double hate.
It's who they dislike least is who they're going to vote for. So I think this race is going to be closer than it was a week ago. I think that you're beginning to see a little bit of movement. And the reason why you're seeing movement is because of I think the Comey decision has dampen the enthusiasm among Hillary voters, and it's like giving Red Bull to every Trump supporter in the country. You have Hillary's campaign machine to get out the vote versus Donald Trump's enthusiasm advantage. And
the luck of a long bad news cycle for her.
Yeah, and honestly, how the hell does this end? I mean, it's not going to end in 7 days.
I think Comey's going to say something about, look, the focus of the investigation is finding out how many of these emails duplicate ones we already have. So far, a lot do. I think he'll put some fencing around it, which is what he should have done in the letter. I have always believed Trump's going to lose the general election. I believe that today because I believe her generic size of demographic vote is bigger than his, and he's offended too many people. But I agree it's tightened too, at least as of this Tuesday. I still think Hillary will win, and it'll be, I used to think it would be 3 to 5 points. Now I think it'll be 3 to 4.
But Mike, don't you think that she has run a very risk-averse campaign? Mm-hmm. She's trying not to lose,
which is a mistake in any campaign.
God, it's
defensive crouch.
Whereas Trump has been like a risk magnet. I mean, it's like
crazy risk. Yeah.
But
no. I agree. I think, look, the Clinton guys have, and I think this is a symptom of her staph disease of too often hiring enablers or a palace cult, but they've never gone out and deflated threatening balloons that are very easy to deflate. She could have gotten rid of the email thing earlier by fessing up and apologizing in the right way. The country would have accepted that. There's so many things they've made worse by their hunker downness, and I think they should be careful. They're trying to whip their supporters up, and I get the political tactic, but they have to be careful about what kind of war they want to pick with the FBI because they make this thing bigger, and when this thing gets bigger, she does worse.
Yeah, I agree. We did our Walmart Moms focus groups last week where it's a project on behalf of Walmart, and it's really been a fascinating project because we have people who really don't pay all that much attention to politics, but yet are on the kind of the front lines of the economy. And we talked to these women about the campaign, about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and they were just as torn as everybody else was about this election. But we asked, okay, so what's Hillary Clinton's message? And there was just silence.
I've earned it. I deserve it. Give it to me. I'm a
woman. I'm a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, whereas they get Donald Trump's message, "Make America Great Again." It's really been interesting the lack of a consistent thematic message coming out of the Clinton campaign that people remember, and because they don't.
Yeah, not Trump and not as corrupt as the people say I am. What do you think, in the best possible Trump scenario, which I think is he loses more narrowly than before, what states do you think he wins in the swing states? It's a surprise. Florida, Ohio, and another one that really would make it close?
I think North Carolina he wins.
Okay, that would be it. Yeah, that would be... Yeah.
But I don't think that he's not going to win Colorado. He's not going to win Virginia.
That's the real lock, that 38th latitude thing there. Because by having those two, he's got to go pull a Pennsylvania, which would be uber hard.
Well, you and I both work there. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Here's the deal. When you have both candidates with such high negatives, I think you're going to find a lower turnout presidential election, and a lower turnout presidential election really does help Donald Trump because he's got a rock hard base. He doesn't have a high ceiling. She has a higher ceiling, but a squishy, soft base. So in a lower turnout election, I think it plays to his advantage. Maybe not enough for him to win the damn thing because you still got to get the 270 mark, and you got him, and that goes through Pennsylvania or some of these other key states, but. He's gonna have a tough time hitting 270, but this is going to be a narrower race than it was 10 days ago.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I've always thought he loses not because the popular vote couldn't inch close, but because she'll have the Electoral College lock under the kind of new reality of the country. Now, what about the Senate races down ballot? If lower turnout happens, that is good, as fewer marginal votes who tend to be more straight-ticket Democratic show up. And does it give the guys a little bit more to work with as a hedge on Hillary? I think it does.
I think it does, too. And I think the Comey decision, he basically threw a lifeline to these Republican candidates. What looked like was going to be a wave election a week ago, Mike, now no longer looks like a wave election. And, in a wave election, the party that loses the wave usually loses all those close races. That may not be the case. So races like North Carolina, Missouri, Nevada, New Hampshire, Florida, they're really on the bubble, and I think it really helps Republican chances of holding the Senate. It's going to be a very tight race. I like the chances right now a lot more than I did a week ago on that.
Yeah, I feel the same. Are you guys, you were probably in the field Sunday night, last night it's Tuesday. Are you seeing that in some of your Senate data that you're doing around the country for IEs or candidates?
We haven't done that much, but what I understand from others who have, they've seen a little bit of movement our direction.
Yeah, I've heard it's a solid step, not a jump. But, compared to the despair, because 2 weeks ago the Senate data was very grim. And now it's definitely stepped back in the right direction. So, surprisingly, if you look at history and top of ticket dynamics, we could be in the hunt. My brain still tells me it's tough in the Senate to hold majority, but my gut, I'm feeling better because of these atmospherics. So, we've got a couple news cycles left, and I never underestimate the ability of Trump to go out and get the spotlight back on him and cost himself a few votes. I've been using the joke. I was on Meet the Press this week on a great old Dennis Miller line. They ought to hood him like a falcon.
I saw that. That was pretty funny. Hood him like a falcon and take his phone away from him.
Yeah, he ought to go tour the submarine force underwater for 3 or 4 days. Anything else you want to add in crazy predictions of the election as we wrap up here? Anywhere? Do you guys have a blog or something where your thoughts at Public Opinion Strategies, POS, on the election can be consumed by people who may be listening who are junkies for this kind of stuff?
Our blog isn't really up to date with our thoughts and this stuff because I'm doing mostly Twitter, but my Twitter handle is KC Kid because I'm from Kansas City. So you can follow me there, and I'm trying to tweet a bunch.
That was your old porn name too, I think, if I recall.
Right.
So it's KC, like Kansas City Kid, on Twitter.
Mike, here's what I'm going to be looking at over the next few days: is where's Hillary traveling to? Where is she going to be spending her time between now and Election Day? And I think that's going to tell a bunch about where they think this race is. Because I think they're going to have more data and more information, more intel as to what the target states are. So I'm watching where she's going to travel, and that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I call it the Dawn Thursday thing because they're going to have a lot of analytical data, a lot of knowledge Wednesday night into Thursday. So it's that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday travel schedule. I think you're going to see Michelle and Barack Obama out there. I think North Carolina is going to be a big hammer. I think Florida still, where they're in the hunt. I still think she can win Florida, as well as make sure they're locked in the Pennsylvania, Colorado. Stuff holds together. But you're right. Where they go, that's the last big decision that campaigns make, and that'll be a huge tell. Where are you going to be election night?
We have a tradition of being here at POS to get. I mean, we're doing a ton of state legislative races and other stuff. Everybody gets together here, and we all collect results here.
Will you make a solemn commitment to our Radio Free GOP listenership here in the Resistance podcast that you'll be tweeting a little bit on election night what you think is going on so people can follow you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'll be watching that. I'll be up at NBC and other places in New York within spitting distance of the Trump Tower. It should be interesting. Neil Newhouse, old pro, old friend, thank you so much for doing Radio Free GOP.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure. I love you and love working with you.
All right, pal. We're going to rebuild the party if we don't make it. All right.
Okay.
Thanks again.
All right. Talk to you.
It's number one for rumors and fun. It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
Okay, I want to thank Neil Newhouse for a great interview. And now up there they are, the Orthodoxy Police. We are on the run. We were so close to Trump Tower the other day. I have to admit, I thought about some graffiti. But Trump keeps his henchmen out front. Would have been tricky with the Secret Service there. I have not given up that ambition. Meanwhile, we better get out of here now. The good thing is I don't have to be quicker than the Orthodoxy Police, just quicker than Newhouse. So maybe they'll catch him. We are off to a new undisclosed location, which will be our next podcast from right after the election, with all the results, all the analysis, and a big discussion of what the future of the Republican Party is going to be. Thank you again for listening. This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance. Because remember, in the end, victory will be ours.
Radio Free GOP, the resistance sound all campaign long.
This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance, with your host, Mike Murphy.